One word that comes to mind when I think of the uprisings in the Middle East this year is an Arabic word, akhiran, finally. Finally, we are seeing people standing up to challenge these authoritarian governments that have been with their foot on the necks of the people for decades and decades. This armor of oppression, this barrier of fear, it just ripped open. It ripped open, and you saw millions and millions and millions of Arabs reaching through, reaching out, overcoming the fear that they'd endured, the suffering they'd endured, with a collective sort of shout that has transfixed the entire world.
The moment I heard that Mubarak had resigned, there was this incredible sense of empowerment that my generation felt.
Listen to that crowd. That's what they've been waiting for. Hosni Mubarak has gone.
This huge cheer went up. It was the most exhilarating experience I've witnessed since I saw the fall of the Berlin Wall.
It's definitely an Arab moment. People are watching. They're learning from each other. There is a domino effect going on.
Dissent in the Arab world is definitely spreading. This time it's hit Libya.
It's finally happened. I don't think any of us would have been able to predict it was going to happen now.
These people are clamoring for freedom as they're talking the language of human rights. We have been reporting on human rights abuses in these countries for many years. We understood the background to these uprisings, which were essentially human rights uprisings.
January 28th was a day when they shut down all the communication. The government was refusing to make public any information about how many people had died. So I started trying to get access to hospitals.
Our researchers have already long established contacts in the country, and so it was very easy for us to transition into covering the government's violence against protesters.
We had seen people die in front of us during the protest. We knew that the only way to answer the question of how many people had died was to go to the morgues, so we could give an exact number and names and circumstances. So many of the people who had died had just been shot by tear gas canisters and rubber bullets at extremely close range. They'd just been murdered in the street the day before.
Nobody else had done that groundwork.
We've been working on documenting the number of casualties.
So to come up with a number that the media could rely on and could use and could challenge the government with was crucial.
The government continues to distort or hide the truth about how many people have been killed or detained in the demonstrations. They continue to claim 11 people have died. According to Human Rights Watch, that number is closer to 300. And they got that number by canvassing hospitals in Cairo, Alexandria, and Suez.
During the Egyptian uprising, so much information was coming out from so many different sources. The government might dismiss tweeters or even individual journalists, but when Human Rights Watch provides the research on the ground with the facts and the names and the dates and the details, then it's very, very hard for government to deny.
We were sending that information back to the American government, which has a very close relationship with the Egyptian army. They put pressure on the army to step in and end the violence, and that's essentially what they did.
The facts are the bottom line, and President Mubarak is being prosecuted right now because of the protesters who died on that day.
Human Rights Watch has never before faced a multitude of crises across such a wide region, but our methodology is the same as our methodology anywhere else. We get as close as possible to the abuses that are taking place.
How close are the tanks inside Misrata?
Why can't we just go and speak to some of the prisoners now?
Our work involves speaking to witnesses and also to the perpetrators. Gathering as much evidence, photographic evidence or video evidence, and then we put it all together, we get the information out there to change the situation on the ground.
Heba and I arrived at the Libyan border and crossed into no man's land. We arrived in Benghazi just days after the city had fallen. We were investigating massacres of civilians, the indiscriminate bombardment of civilian towns, hundreds of people who had been taken by Gaddafi forces and disappeared.
From what we can tell, and as you know, that journalists are banned, and we are relying on reports from Human Rights Watch and other observers, there has been less violence, very little so far in Tripoli, although
the international community was caught like a deer with headlights on it. They didn't have people on the ground in places like Benghazi.
We uncovered the atrocities that were carried out by the Libyan regime in trying to suppress the uprising and then in pursuing the war against the rebels.
The areas which are burned is where the bodies were.
The only people who can tell us what's happening are the eyewitnesses to these atrocities.
Does he know when the bodies were burned inside?
We don't rely on rumor or secondary information. And it's of fundamental importance that we document abuses on both sides.
We found ourselves in constant dialogue with the United Nations, with the US State Department, with the French government, with the British government, telling them not only what was happening on the ground, but what they needed to do.
Were you here when the two bodies came?
Human Rights Watch played a significant role in lobbying for a Security Council resolution 1970, which referred Libya to the International Criminal Court.
The chamber hereby issues a warrant of arrest for Muammar Gaddafi.
The court sent a very strong message to the core members of the regime that they would be held to account for their actions. And in fact, there were some very high-level defections.
The referral of Libya to the ICC in a scope of 4 days, unprecedented. Without the information that we were able to produce, we would not have seen international action that moved so quickly.
The challenge for anyone working on Syria today is getting access. We had an important advantage. We had been working on Syria for years, had the contacts, had the networks, and more importantly, we had the trust of people inside Syria.
So we did deploy a team to go inside Syria to investigate the violence that had started in Daraa. We also deployed researchers to the Turkish border, to the Lebanese border, to the Jordanian border, to talk to Syrians who were fleeing the country.
We've documented torture by a number of the agencies, state security, political security, military security, particularly the feared Palestine branch of the military security.
There's a lot of information coming. The challenge is to cross-check it and get to the facts.
My name is Nadim Houri, and I'm the senior researcher on Syria at Human Rights Watch. The protesters have used video. They've used their cell phones, their cameras, to capture what is happening and to send it to the outside world in the hope that the international community will put pressure on Syria.
The Syrian government was doing its very best to keep information locked up. Try as they may, we're going to get it. We're going to get it out, and we're going to let the whole world know.
Watchdog group Human Rights Watch interviewed people who'd been detained during recent protests. Some of them, ages 16 and 17, described to the group what Syrian security forces did to them.
Electrocution with cattle prods, beatings, being hung.
We worked incessantly to push the US and the EU to establish targeted sanctions against the Syrian government. They had implemented asset freezes of key Syrian officials, travel bans on key Syrian officials, and sanctions on the oil assets of Syria. These were all incredibly important measures in isolating President Assad and his circle of cronies.
There is no doubt that these sanctions will limit the ability of the authorities to continue financing the repression. President Assad's world is shrinking. One thing is certain, there's no going back to the way Syria was before.
The uprisings, the overcoming of the fear barrier, the challenging of the authoritarian governments, staring down police officers and soldiers with guns, that was the bravest part of the revolution, and it's revolution part one. Part two of the revolution is going to be rewriting the laws of these countries, rewriting the constitutions, restructuring the justice ministry and the interior ministries and the security services of those countries. The big question now is who's next? Which Arab leader is going to be the next to fall? And I think the answer is very simple. They're all next. they're all going to fall because they are standing in opposition to what every human being wants, which is to be treated fairly and decently with their rights and their freedom and their spirit intact.